Good morning, everyone. I knew that talking after Sage was going to be a little bit difficult, having seen how vividly and interestingly he presents. So I figured I'd start with a nice picture of an undersea creature. That's not the kind of animal you would expect at Cephalocon, but that's the best shot I managed to get of myself. This is actually what I did last month. I was training to be a dive professional, just in case this whole software-defined storage and open source doesn't work out. I have a second leg now. Preparing for this event, I actually got curious of my own personal history around Ceph. I'm now CTO at Suse. That actually started May 1st. Before that, I was running the products organization, so product management, which means people always have ideas of, you need to do this product, or can't we do Suse, whatever. One of those ideas that actually a colleague of mine called Lars, he's actually very engaged around Ceph, sits on the board now, brought up to us as early as 2010 was, let's do storage, let's do software-defined storage. There is this new project called Ceph. I think actually Lars may have brought it up earlier. 2010 is when I could find the first note. Anything before I have in my inbox was actually talking about tick-borne encephalitis, which is not so much of a good thing, even if it contains the string Ceph. As early as 2011, in an internal communications talking about portfolio, etc., I found that quote. So we continue to put our bets on Ceph for the future, which I was actually rather surprised to see how early we made that statement, even if it was internal. But then in 2012 is actually the first time we shipped Ceph. We didn't ship it as a separate product. We shipped it as the first version, or as part of the first version of our OpenStack offering. And that is actually, from our perspective, is still one of the key use cases where you would Ceph in an OpenStack context. So most people that we see use OpenStack either use Ceph also, or at least consider Ceph for a storage. And 2019, I'm really happy to say that if anything, we are as committed or more committed to Ceph, and Ceph as a technology, and Ceph in form of the community or communities than ever before. And you'll hear me talk about this often internally. Sometimes I feel a bit like a missionary when it comes to free software and open source projects. It's not just about the code, it's not just about the license, performance, quality, all those things that enterprise users or expect. It's really about the community. And so being at an event like this and seeing how vibrant, how strong this community around Ceph is, and now with the Ceph Foundation and everything, I'm more convinced than ever before that going with Ceph and for customers, users going with Ceph is really the right choice. Because the technology is there, which is great, but there's also this community, and there are many players, and you have seen it on Sage's slide when he introduced the platinum, gold, silver sponsors, the associate sponsors. I think that's really something to be happy about. But ultimately, whatever we do in open source, whenever we engage with open source, it's usually for one out of two reasons. The first one is to scratch our own itch. I can talk for myself, and it's probably similarly for you, or for those of you who are developers. Most open source projects I'm engaged, mostly in my spare time now, I have joined or I have started interacting with because there was something I needed to do or something I tried to do and there was an issue. So you report a bug or you fix a typo or something like that. So that's one case. The other case is actually serving others. And in form of you're in IT, you're a vendor, whatever. And I will argue that Ceph actually has been serving customers and users really well. And there's three examples I brought with me. One is University of Maine. They actually converted their storage to a cluster running Cephfs, and they put 2 million files in one directory for whatever reason. And I see someone shaking his head. Yeah, I agree. But for the application, that's what made sense. And despite this enormous scaling, Ceph, or perhaps because of that, their workload sped up by a factor of 2. Another interesting case is there was a big technology firm, and they wanted to build up a Ceph cluster. They had reserved 5 days because clearly it's a difficult thing. It turns out they were able to provision a cluster with more than 100 nodes in less than or about 3 hours. So one of the aspects that historically has been, and the reason I'm showing this is one of the aspects that historically has not been the strength of Ceph, with all the developments that have happening in upstream and the individual distributions, has now, I would argue, become a strength. And last but not least, in Asia, there's a government agency, and they deployed a small 30 petabyte cluster, and they're using that to collect video feeds. And then they want to predict traffic flow in real time. And that talks to the performance and the latency guarantees that Ceph can make these days. And then, having productized and supported customers with Ceph, I can tell you the speed improvements that we have seen on Ceph, both on block and Cephfs, really have been very, very significant. And what used to be sometimes a challenge, because resiliency, scaling, those were attributes people went for, performance was like okay-ish, is now more and more becoming okay-ish, okay, and really an advantage that we see. You won't be surprised if one of the things I'm showing here, it's got the Suse branding, because that's what we took the screenshots of, but this is really the Ceph dashboard. So one of the things we heard early and we noticed early on from users of Ceph was, this is complicated. I mean, it does everything I need, but I need to spend too much time to learn, too much time to deploy, too much time then to manage, and I don't have all those experts. So how can you make it easier? And that's really where a colleague of mine who actually, Larry, who was responsible in product management, he came early and said, we need to do something about usability. We need to provide a graphical user interface that runs in a web browser. And so that's an investment we did. And I'm very, very pleased to see how what originally was OpenEthic that we pushed into open source and connected on our end, then became Ceph Dashboard. And this integration of different initiatives where different people, different groups scratch their own itch, or the itch of their users, and then feedback into the main realm of Ceph, into the main Ceph code base, and the openness with which the Ceph community, Sage and others, accept those innovations and really extend open arms, help integrate, talk about it, promote. That's really something that I'm really, really happy to see. And if I have to name 2-3 reasons why I believe Ceph is going to be successful and really keep growing as a community and as a technology, I think it's this openness, this embracing of contributions, and really different groups of users and vendors working together, and clearly having a Ceph foundation helps with that. So usability clearly was one. Another area where we have seen quite some demand and quite some improvements is around the unified storage. I mean, it's interesting. It was interesting to hear Sage talk about how Ceph originally, on the first slides, was about being a distributed file system. because the use cases that we looked at originally and where people felt most comfortable using Ceph were around object store and block storage. But CephFS really has been catching up. Originally, we had to caution customers and say, like, let's do performance validation. It's nice that you want to use this, but let's make sure it fits your use case. And now, over the last 1-2 years, CephFS really has grown in stability and performance. Another one I mentioned is deployment, where with salt-based deep sea and the Ceph dashboard, really we feel today we have a good solution. But there's others, and it's fine to have competing solutions when it comes to things like that. There's multiple approaches, and perfectly happy to see that. Another area is really heterogeneity, not just in the kind of storage you provide, but in the systems you serve. Unfortunately, as much as I would love to, not everyone uses free and open software systems. So we don't just have Linux users or perhaps BSD users. We have Windows users, we have VMware. And so having a nice CASI interface to serve those platforms has been really important. And last but not least, and Sage also mentioned that it's really about ecosystems. The times where there's one vendor and you got hardware, software services, everything from that one vendor are pretty much gone. So now you get hardware here, possibly from different vendors, the operating system or a platform there, applications there. So what's really important is that those vendors work together and there are communities. They can work together in communities. Intel being mentioned as an example is a really good one. So we work together in communities and make sure when you come as a user, those pieces work together. And this is the only product slide I'll be using, and I won't actually be talking to the product. Tomorrow is the day, so this is the sneak preview if you want. Tomorrow is the day where we will be launching the 9th release of a Ceph-based product, Suse Enterprise Storage 6. It's based on Nautilus, so all that Sage talked about earlier is in there. And that's all I'll be saying about that release. I do want to say something. I do want to thank you, those of you in the developer communities, those of you who work on the Ceph foundations, those of you who help organize events like this, users who provide input, bug reports. Without your help, without this community aspect, we wouldn't be able to have such a solution. But it's not over now. I mean, clearly, Sage has a vision of a road ahead. So do we. And it's funny because Sage and me haven't actually synced, but when I now listened to his presentation, there were many things that we share that we see in common as for the future. One is containerization. I mean, this is KubeCon, and containerizing Ceph itself is a very good use case, or has many good use cases, one of which is hyperconvergence. So also containerizing something like OpenStack, for example, so that you then have compute, networking, storage, everything containerized, running on the same nodes, which opens new applications. Another one, and it originally seemed a little bit outlandish, is what people call AIOps. So using artificial intelligence in operations. And the idea here is that Ceph is already very scalable and very reliant, but really continue the journey. Make Ceph, if you want, not just self-managing, but also self-optimizing, self-healing, so that there is less and less operator engagement you need. Another element which we are looking into is interoperability. I mentioned Windows VMware. iSCSI is great, but there are other approaches we're looking into where we can connect to and serve those platforms even more tightly. We hope to have a bigger announcement on that later this year. And then obviously, and containerization helps with that. There is hybrid cloud and general consumption model. How do we actually consume something like Ceph? That may include such boring things at least for technical people, like pricing models, but it also may may include finding something like Ceph, and I didn't think it made sense, but I was convinced it did. Some people actually using Ceph on public clouds because of inherent limitations of some of the storage systems there, or really going all in hybrid where you connect the different data sources. And with that, this mimic octopus that I had the pleasure to spend some time with underwater and me, really hope you have a great event here, you have a great Cephalocon, and also enjoy Barcelona. My real recommendation for an event like this is obviously go to presentations and learn, but also mingle. If you're a developer, obviously you want to talk to other developers. Use the opportunity to talk with users. If you're a user, grab some developers and bite off their ears on what you really think is something you think they should be doing. But don't forget to celebrate. Ceph has come a very long way. Ceph has a very bright future. And all of you, by definition, because you came here to Cephalocon, because you contributed code, you're interested in Ceph, are part of the journey. So be proud of that and celebrate. And last but not least, if you have children or you like plush animals, we have 1,000 of those geckos over there at the Suse booth, and I'll be sharing some with you. If you don't like them, give them to someone who has children. Please don't feed them to your dogs. Thanks for all the fish. Enjoy.